Hey everybody, Paymon here again, and today I want to talk to you about 5 things you need to know to create standout visual content. Now, before I get into the actual lessons, what I want to show you a little bit more from a scientific approach is the understanding of how the human perception works. Because when you create content, you are basically communicating with humans. And so in order to communicate visually, you have to also understand how us as humans absorb and understand and translate visual information to actual content through our brains. So the way it works is that the way it doesn't work is we don't process images like a camera. All right, we are not cameras. So your brain versus the camera. A camera has a very wide field of clear vision, but the brain has a very narrow field of vision. So it's actually only about 2 degrees for your brain versus for the camera, which is about 180 degrees. So it's much wider on the camera and your brain is much shorter. And that's one of the big problems. People are often creating content that is really for a camera. A camera absorbs and catches information. It grabs information in one piece. Now your aperture on the camera may be just a few moments. It might be a 30th of a second or longer, but at the end of the day, it is going to get all that information, all those pixelations, millions of them in one round. The human brain doesn't work like that, all right? So how does the human brain work? The way we process the same photo is a little bit different, and here's how it works. Rapid eye movement called saccades, all right? And so the way it works is that your eye is very quickly moving for different places that it's looking in the environment and is very quickly grabbing little bits and pieces of information. And so the way that your brain thinks it's seeing is an actual image, but you're really just absorbing little pieces of it. Right now you're looking at me and you don't realize that you're actually applying the same thing. Very quickly your eyes go in different places, probably look at my hair and arms and so on. And so the same principle goes when you're creating content, static or interactive. All right, so you have to actually be able to understand and to apply it to when you create content for human consumption. All right, so in terms of creating content for human consumption, there's one more thing that you want to understand, and that is the pre-attentive attributes. That is basically where subconsciously your brain is accumulating certain amount of information with respect to the environment. So here's an example. Here, there's a foreground versus a background, all as a silhouette. They're all the same color. And you're trying to understand what is actually being shown here. However, what's happening is your brain is working very hard, working and looking through different areas to try to understand what is actually seeing. Now, if you look at this one, you got a buck and you got, for some reason, a polar bear running after a buck. I don't know why, but very quickly, in a matter of a second, you're able to understand what is being presented to you. So it's extremely important when you create content to put this crucial tool to use. And basically, it's contrast. Contrast, contrast, contrast. Whenever you create content, you design content for whatever type of media it is, make sure that the content that you're putting together with respect to the background, such as the imagery and the foreground, the text and the icons and so on, there's a certain balance and respect of contrasts against each other. All right, so let's take a look and let's do a real exercise in terms of contrast. Right now, I'm standing right here in front of you and I'm talking and I've got a white background right behind me. And in just a matter of a moment, I'm going to take away the contrast and see how it works. So I'm going to go into a dark background and I'm going to stop moving and I'm going to stop talking in just a matter of a second. And Mr. Producer, go ahead and turn off the lights. So it's very quiet, it's very dark, very little contrast, and you can't see me. Now, it's very bright again. And what happens now is there is this contrast between me, who's wearing dark, versus a background that's very light. So you can clearly see me versus the background. You want to apply the same principle to the content that you create. All right, let's do a real exercise. Now, back to where this is the 5 things I want you to know to create standout visual content. We're going to do a very simple exercise. And so here we have a image in the background. It's a polar bear floating in water. This is about the greenhouse effect is real. And the reason I'm saying greenhouse effect, a lot of people still don't believe that global warming is real. That's a separate argument for the sake of making everybody happy. The greenhouse effect is real. There's some content here. And then there is a contrast, very little contrast against the background. The problem here is that it's very hard for your brain to absorb and understand this information. It also doesn't look very pretty. So the first thing you want to do is to establish your focal point. The important element in this design that you see here, the title, of course, is one of the important focal points. So we want to make the title stand out. Therefore, what we do is give some emphasis to the title, make it larger, space it out a little bit more, and actually to the left of it, there's a tiny little shape. And that makes it pop a little more versus the content underneath of it. So there's a little bit of separation. Number two, you want to differentiate the content. So with differentiation, what you want to do is, again, we have the title, the size of the font is smaller underneath of it, so there's some differentiation. And so in this case, what we also want to do is to apply some contrast from the foreground to the background. So what we're going to do is add a little box underneath, and that dark box is going to give some contrast versus the background. And the text is now white over a dark, somewhat translucent background shape, and then there's the image behind it. So now you have fairly clear text that you can easily read and the title. Now, the next thing is patterns. All right, so in the real world, dogs are your best friends. In the digital world, I want you to think about it, or in design world, patterns are your friends. You could use them for, or you can use them against you. So in this case, we have a pattern of a series of boxes. The color is very similar, and also there's one that's popping out. You could use that as a sticking point, or you can use a pattern as a way to actually relay and organize your information. So in the example, going back to what we have the title, and we have the text that is kind of centered in the middle. Everything at the top of the title is left centered, left justified. We want to do the same thing with the text underneath of it. So what you end up with is left justified text, left justified body text underneath of it. And so you have a little bit more of an organization. The next thing you want to do is to also separate the boxes. So I'm using the pattern of having a squares, and I'm following that through to these two boxes underneath. And so I'm separating the content from the three, I guess I should say, bullet points at this point. Now, the next thing is that you want to simplify to improve the focus. We have a little bit of a text, 3 bullet points, they're pretty text heavy. So you want to always try to work hard to minimize the amount of content that you have. Try to speak visually and reduce the amount of text. So in this case, what we're going to do is to reduce the amount of text in the bullet points and actually use visual cues. All right, so we have 3 bullet points, and in this case, we're talking about 20% decline in the sea ice, and then we also have, 66% of the polar bears are going to, unfortunately, vanish by the year 2050. And so by using icons and shortening the text, we end up with a better representation and simpler way of the content. You can do the same thing by applying that again through the patterns, and also by using the patterns and actually separating additional boxes, so each bullet point gets its own compartment in essence, so your eye kind of easily can navigate through and better absorb and understand that information. And last but not least, has to do with the photo. So it's pretty important that you want to concentrate on grabbing high quality photos these days. There's tons of photos out there that you can use. And so in this case, if you look at the before, the photo is kind of dull. In this case, a little bit of color correction. It's a little bit brighter and a better quality. And last but not least, number 5 is creating interactivity. So with interactivity, again, you can't always do this if you're creating something for print, for a magazine, and so on. You can't really have interactivity in your image, right? So, however, in case of web content, digital content, you can actually apply interactivity animations to your designs. So in this case, what we've done is, whatever this is done in, you can do this in PowerPoint, you can do this in Prezi, you can do this in Visme, our own tool allows you to do animations. You can take little subtle areas and actually apply short animations to them. But you have to be very careful. And the example I'm going to show you is kind of subtle, but you really don't want to do too much. You don't want to apply too much animation, because then you actually take away from the focal points. In this case, we have the title and we have the other elements in just a matter of a second coming together. And so you have a subtle kind of an emphasis and everything comes together. So that's kind of the 5 points that I want to tell you about. These are the 5 things you need to know to create standout visual content. Put them to work, practice them, and I will see you next time.